A man came to Al-Ghazali completely broken. His business had failed, his family had abandoned him, and he felt like every door in life had slammed shut. Al-Ghazali taught him a specific way of breathing, not for relaxation, but for spiritual alignment. 3 months later, this man's entire reality had transformed. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere. Relationships healed, and his inner peace became unshakable. What was this technique, and why does it work when everything else fails? To understand Al-Ghazali's breathing method, we need to go back to the 11th century Baghdad, where Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali was at the peak of his intellectual career. He was the most celebrated scholar in the Islamic world, head of the prestigious Nizamiya University, and had everything a person could want: fame, respect, wealth, and influence. But despite all his achievements, Al-Ghazali felt spiritually empty. He had mastered Islamic law, theology, and philosophy, but something was missing. He knew about the divine, but he didn't feel connected to it. He could teach others about spiritual matters, but his own heart felt closed. Then came his crisis. In 1095, Al-Ghazali experienced what we might call a nervous breakdown. He couldn't eat, couldn't speak properly, and couldn't continue teaching. His entire worldview had collapsed. He realized that all his knowledge was just intellectual information. It hadn't transformed his inner being. So he did something radical. He abandoned his prestigious position, left his comfortable life in Baghdad, and embarked on a spiritual journey. He traveled to Damascus, Jerusalem, and Mecca, seeking not more knowledge but direct experience of the divine. It was during this period of wandering and seeking that Al-Ghazali discovered the breathing technique that would become central to his spiritual practice. He found that breath wasn't just a biological function, it was a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds. In his masterwork, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, Al-Ghazali explains that breath carries more than just oxygen. It carries spiritual energy, divine presence, and the power to transform consciousness. But most people breathe mechanically, missing the incredible potential that lies in conscious breathing. Al-Ghazali's technique is based on a profound understanding. Every breath you take is actually a conversation with the divine. When you inhale, you're receiving life force directly from the source of all existence. When you exhale, you're releasing everything that separates you from that source. But here's the key. It's not just about breathing slowly or deeply. Al-Ghazali discovered specific patterns, specific intentions, and specific states of consciousness that transform ordinary breathing into what he called the breath of the soul. The technique begins with what Al-Ghazali called the breath of remembrance. You start by focusing your complete attention on your breathing, but not in a mechanical way. Instead, you breathe with the awareness that every breath is a gift from the divine source. The first stage is purification breathing. As you inhale slowly through your nose, you consciously invite divine light and guidance into your being. Al-Ghazali taught that you should breathe as if you're drawing in pure spiritual energy, not just air. Hold this breath for a moment while feeling gratitude for the life force you've received. Then, as you exhale slowly through your mouth, you consciously release everything that blocks your connection to the divine. Fears, anxieties, negative thoughts, spiritual impurities. Al-Ghazali said this exhalation should feel like you're letting go of everything that doesn't serve your highest good. But the technique goes deeper than this basic pattern. Al-Ghazali discovered that certain divine names, when silently repeated with the breath, create specific spiritual effects. He taught that breathing while inwardly reciting, "There is no God but God," during inhalation, and "Muhammad is the messenger of God" during exhalation, creates a powerful alignment with divine truth. The second stage, Al-Ghazali called the breath of the heart. This involves breathing not just with your lungs, but imagining that your heart itself is breathing. With each inhale, you visualize your heart expanding with divine light. With each exhale, you feel your heart sending this light throughout your entire being. Al-Ghazali taught that the heart has its own intelligence, its own way of knowing that transcends the mind. When you breathe consciously with your heart, you're activating this deeper form of perception. This is how people begin to receive guidance, inspiration, and solutions to problems that the mind alone cannot solve. The third stage is what Al-Ghazali called the breath of unity. This is the most advanced level, where your breathing becomes so aligned with divine presence that you feel your individual breath merging with the universal breath of existence. At this level, Al-Ghazali taught, your personal will becomes aligned with divine will, and what seemed impossible begins to manifest. But Al-Ghazali emphasized that this technique is not just about the mechanics of breathing, it's about the state of consciousness you bring to the practice. He taught that you must approach this breathing with what he called the presence of heart, complete sincerity, humility, and openness to divine guidance. He also stressed the importance of purity, not just physical cleanliness, but purity of intention. You shouldn't use this technique to manipulate outcomes or force your personal desires onto reality. Instead, you breathe with the intention of aligning yourself with whatever serves the highest good. Al-Ghazali discovered that when people practice this technique regularly, several things begin to happen. First, their emotional state becomes more stable. The anxieties and fears that used to overwhelm them have lost their power. They develop what Al-Ghazali called tranquility of the heart, an inner peace that remains steady regardless of external circumstances. Second, their intuition becomes stronger. They start receiving insights and guidance that help them navigate life's challenges more effectively. Problems that used to seem impossible begin to have solutions. Opportunities start appearing that they never noticed before. Third, their relationships improve. When your inner state is aligned with divine peace, you naturally become more patient, compassionate, and understanding with others. People are drawn to the calmness and wisdom that radiate from someone who practices this breathing technique consistently. But perhaps most importantly, Al-Ghazali taught that this breathing technique opens what he called the doors of divine mercy. When you align your breath with divine presence, you create space for grace to enter your life. Things begin to flow more easily, help arrives from unexpected sources, and what seemed like closed doors begin to open. Al-Ghazali was very specific about when and how to practice this technique. He recommended beginning before dawn, during what Muslims call the time of blessed breath, the period between the last third of the night and sunrise, when the spiritual atmosphere is most conducive to this kind of practice. He taught that you should find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed, face the direction of Mecca if possible, and begin with a brief prayer asking for divine guidance and protection. Then you start with just a few minutes of conscious breathing, gradually increasing the duration as your capacity develops. Al-Ghazali also emphasized the importance of consistency. He said that practicing this breathing technique once in a while won't create a lasting transformation. But when you make it a daily practice, it gradually reshapes your entire being. Your consciousness becomes more refined. Your heart becomes more receptive to divine guidance, and your life begins to reflect this inner transformation. He warned against treating this technique as a quick fix or magic solution. The transformation happens gradually as your inner state becomes more aligned with divine qualities like patience, gratitude, compassion, and trust. But he promised that for those who practice sincerely and consistently, the results are profound and lasting. Modern science is beginning to understand some of what Al-Ghazali discovered centuries ago. Research shows that conscious breathing practices can reduce stress hormones, improve emotional regulation, enhance cognitive function, and even strengthen the immune system. But Al-Ghazali understood that the benefits go far beyond what modern science can measure. He taught that this breathing technique actually changes your spiritual frequency. When you breathe with divine awareness, you become more receptive to subtle forms of guidance and support that operate beyond the physical level. You start to experience what Al-Ghazali called divine assistance, help that comes in ways that logic cannot explain. But Al-Ghazali also taught that this technique must be combined with ethical living. You can't use conscious breathing to align with divine presence while treating others badly or living dishonestly. The technique works best when it's part of a larger commitment to spiritual development and moral excellence. He emphasized that the ultimate goal isn't just personal transformation, but becoming a source of blessing for others. When your breathing becomes aligned with divine presence, you naturally become more helpful, more compassionate, and more beneficial to everyone around you. Al-Ghazali lived this teaching himself. After discovering this breathing technique and the other spiritual practices that transformed his life, he returned to teaching, but now his words carried a different power. Students said that being in his presence was itself a spiritual experience. His teachings came not just from his intellect, but from his direct experience of divine reality. A man who had come to Al-Ghazali, broken and hopeless, learned this breathing technique and practiced it faithfully. Within weeks, he noticed changes in his inner state. The despair that had consumed him began to lift. He felt calmer, more centered, more open to possibilities. As his inner state shifted, his outer circumstances began to change as well. Business opportunities that he hadn't noticed before became apparent. People who had been distant began to offer help and support. Solutions to problems that had seemed impossible started presenting themselves. But the most important change was in his relationship with difficulty itself. Instead of seeing challenges as evidence that life was against him, he began to see them as opportunities for growth and spiritual development. His breathing practice had given him an unshakable inner foundation that remained stable regardless of external circumstances. Al-Ghazali taught that this is how divine assistance works. It doesn't necessarily remove all challenges from your life, but it gives you the inner resources to handle whatever comes with wisdom, patience, and grace. When you're breathing with divine awareness, you're connected to a source of strength and guidance that transcends your personal limitations. This is why Al-Ghazali called conscious breathing the key that opens impossible doors. It's not that the technique magically removes all obstacles, but that it transforms your relationship with obstacles. When your inner state is aligned with divine presence, what seemed impossible often becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Today, if you're facing challenges that seem insurmountable, if you feel like every door in your life is closed, Al-Ghazali's breathing technique offers a way forward. It's not a quick fix, but it's a reliable method for aligning your inner state with the source of all solutions. The technique is simple, but Al-Ghazali emphasized that simple doesn't mean easy. It requires sincerity, consistency, and patience. But for those who commit to this practice, the results speak for themselves. Start small. Begin with just 5 minutes each morning, breathing with the awareness that every breath connects you to the divine source. Let each inhale fill you with gratitude and divine light. Let each exhale release whatever blocks your connection to peace and guidance. As Al-Ghazali discovered 9 centuries ago, when you learn to breathe with divine awareness, you discover that the impossible is often just a matter of perspective. And sometimes all it takes is a single conscious breath to open a door that seemed permanently closed. So what began as a broken man coming to Al-Ghazali in despair turned into a timeless teaching, the secret of aligning breath with the divine. Al-Ghazali showed that transformation doesn't always come from wealth, status, or even knowledge. It comes from the simple, conscious act of breathing with awareness of God. Every inhale can be a gift. Every exhale can be a surrender. And when you breathe with sincerity, consistency, and presence of heart, doors that seem forever locked begin to open. Remember, true change doesn't happen outside first. It begins within. And sometimes the smallest act, a single breath, can become the key that unlocks the impossible. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to NoorDeen for more wisdom, insights, and timeless teachings.